The week after Leonard died, his sons came to our house with a lawyer I'd never met. I want you to understand something about that detail. The lawyer I'd never met. After 31 years of marriage, after attending every one of their birthday dinners and holiday gatherings and college graduations, after flying across the country to sit in the front row when Garrett got married, and after holding Patricia's hand in the waiting room when she miscarried her first baby, after all of that, the Aldrich boys brought a stranger into my home to deliver the news that I was no longer welcome in it. Please subscribe to the channel to see what happens next. His name was Garrett, Leonard's eldest, 51 years old, tall like his father had been before the illness took 20 pounds off him, with a jaw that looked like it had been designed specifically for telling people things they didn't want to hear. His younger brother, Dale, was 47, softer in the face but harder in the eyes. Dale had always been the one to smile while he twisted the knife. Garrett didn't bother with the smile. They sat across from me in the living room where Leonard and I had spent 30 years of Sunday mornings reading the paper in comfortable silence. The lawyer, a pinched-looking man named Forsyth, set his briefcase on the coffee table I'd bought at an estate sale in Vermont. The one Leonard had always rested his coffee cup on, leaving little rings I'd never been able to get fully out. "Margaret," Garrett said, and the way he said my name had always bothered me, like he was mispronouncing it on purpose. Like I was an inconvenient word in a sentence that would read better without me. "We wanted to come to you directly. Out of respect." "Respect," I nodded and waited. Forsyth opened his briefcase and produced a document that was, I would later learn, not the document it was supposed to be. "Your husband's estate," he began, "has been valued at approximately $2.4 million, inclusive of the primary residence here in Asheville, the investment property in Brevard, the vehicle and personal assets, and the business holdings from Aldrich Custom Millwork." He paused to let those numbers settle. "Per the terms of the will, the residential and investment properties pass jointly to Garrett and Dale Aldrich. Business assets are to be liquidated and split between the two of them as well." I waited for the rest. "Your provision," Forsyth continued, adjusting his glasses, "is the life insurance policy in the amount of $150,000. Plus any personal property that was solely yours prior to the marriage." Silence. $150,000. I said. "That's correct." I looked at Garrett. He held my gaze without flinching. Dale studied the pattern on the rug. "Leonard assured me," I said carefully, "that I would be provided for." Those were his exact words. "More than once." "Dad said a lot of things," Garrett replied, and there was something in his tone. Not cruelty exactly, but the practiced neutrality of someone who has already decided that your feelings are not his problem. "But this is what the legal document says. And that's what matters." Forsyth produced a second paper. "There's also the matter of outstanding debt associated with Mr. Aldrich's final medical treatment. Approximately $94,000 remaining after insurance coverage. As his spouse, you were a party to those treatment decisions, and the creditors will be looking to you for repayment. $94,000 in debt, $150,000 from the insurance. That left me $56,000. To start over, at 64 years old, in a house I'd be required to vacate within 45 days. "I'll need some time," I said. "Of course," Dale said, finally looking up. His voice was warm in the way that air conditioning is warm, artificially adjusted to the temperature most people find comfortable. "Take all the time you need. Margaret, we just want this to be as easy as possible for everyone." Everyone. What a generous word. They left 20 minutes later. I stood at the front window and watched Garrett's black SUV back out of my driveway. The one Leonard had repaved the summer he retired, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not grief, not despair. Curiosity. Because 2 days before he died, Leonard had pressed my hand between both of his and told me, "Maggie, I need you to check the workshop. Behind the red toolbox on the second shelf. Don't forget." I'd assumed it was the morphine talking. I'd kissed his forehead and told him I wouldn't forget. I had forgotten. Until now. The workshop was attached to the back of the house. A cedar-sided room Leonard had built himself the second year of our marriage. He'd spent every weekend in there for 11 months. And when it was finished, he'd stood in the doorway with paint on his hands and sawdust in his eyebrows and said, "Now I have a place that's just mine." Then he'd handed me a key. "And now so do you." That key was still on my keyring. I'd never thought to wonder why. The red toolbox was exactly where he'd said it would be. On the second shelf above the workbench. Between a coffee can full of mismatched screws and a jar of wood stain Leonard had bought for a project he never finished. Behind the toolbox, taped to the wall with masking tape and 3 strips of blue painter's tape for good measure, was a manila envelope. On the front, in Leonard's handwriting, the cramped, deliberate print he used when he was being serious, were 5 words. "For Maggie, read this first." I sat down on the wooden stool Leonard kept by the workbench and I opened the envelope with hands that shook just slightly at the edges. Inside were more papers than I'd expected. More than I could process standing up. I sat there for a very long time. Part 2. What the envelope contained. The first thing I found was a letter. 3 pages, front and back, in Leonard's handwriting. "My dearest Maggie. If you're reading this, then I'm gone and the boys have done what I was afraid they would do. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I was alive. I need you to understand that everything I did to protect you. And I need you to know that I never stopped believing you were the best thing that ever walked into my life." The letter went on. "About 18 months ago, I noticed some irregularities in the millwork business accounts. At first I thought it was bookkeeping errors. Dale had been managing the books for 3 years. And he'd always been careless with paperwork. But the numbers kept not adding up in the same direction. And after a while I had to admit to myself what I was looking at. Dale had been skimming, not a little, consistently, methodically, over nearly 2 years. By the time I brought in an outside accountant, he'd taken approximately $212,000. Not all at once. Never enough in a single transaction to trigger an alert. Just a slow, steady bleed that he'd been counting on me being too sick to notice. I had to stop reading. I set the letter down on the workbench and looked at the ceiling of the workshop and tried to breathe steadily. "Dale." Quiet, warm-voiced, rug-studying Dale. I picked the letter back up. When I confronted him, he cried. He said he was in debt. That a series of bad investments had left him underwater. That he'd intended to pay it all back before I ever found out. Garrett knew. I'm not certain when he found out. But by the time I sat down with Dale, Garrett had already spoken to a lawyer, not to help me, but to protect Dale from criminal liability. That's when I understood what I was dealing with. These are not my sons who made a mistake. These are 2 men who looked at your 31 years beside me and decided they were worth $56,000. I filed a report with the accountant and preserved all the records. You'll find copies in the envelope, along with bank statements and the original audit. Everything has been transferred to an attorney named Ruth Calloway at Calloway and Marsh in downtown Asheville. She has been holding the real will, the one I executed 14 months ago. After I found out what Dale had done, in her office safe. She's been waiting for your call. Here is what the real will says. Maggie, everything comes to you. Everything. The house, the Brevard property, whatever is left in the business accounts after I paid back what Dale stole, which I did. Quietly, by selling the commercial van and 3 pieces of equipment so Dale wouldn't know the money was gone. The insurance policy is not $150,000. It's $400,000, and there is a second policy for $200,000 that Garrett and Dale do not know exists. There was one more thing. The house and the Brevard property. I mortgaged them both. 8 months ago. The house carries a $480,000 lien. The Brevard property carries a $290,000 lien. The proceeds are sitting in a protected account at Blue Ridge Savings under your name and social security number only. I've been adding to it for 2 years. Garrett and Dale's inheritance, if you choose to give it to them, is 2 properties that cost more than they're worth. But that choice is yours. Maggie, the will gives you complete discretion. You can gift them the properties. Or you can keep everything and let the courts sort out what they deserve. Either way, you are not broke. You are not homeless. And you are not alone. I love you. I always have. Don't let them make you small. Leonard. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with the entire contents of the envelope spread in front of me, the letter, the bank statements, the audit report, the business records showing exactly how much Dale had stolen and when. Printed email exchanges between Garrett and Forsyth discussing how to present the fraudulent will before I could seek independent legal counsel. And at the very bottom of the stack, a business card for Ruth Calloway with Leonard's handwriting on the back. She knows everything. Call her tomorrow. By 4 in the morning I had read every page twice. By 5, I had made myself a cup of tea and sat watching the sky go gray over the mountains Leonard had loved more than anywhere else on earth. And I made a decision. I was not going to call Ruth Calloway tomorrow. I was going to call her in 2 hours, when her office opened at 8. But between now and then, I had one more thing to do. I called Dale. Margaret, he said, picking up after 2 rings. His voice immediately wrapped in that practiced warmth. Is everything all right? It's early. I know, I said. I'm sorry to call so early. I've just been up all night thinking. And I needed to hear a friendly voice. The pause that followed was almost imperceptible. Almost. Of course. What's going on? I've been going through some of Leonard's things in the workshop, I said, keeping my voice carefully unsteady. The right amount of grief fogged. And I keep finding documents I don't understand. Business papers, bank statements for accounts I've never heard of. I think Leonard had some financial arrangements he never fully explained to me. Silence. Then, what kind of documents? That's just it. I'm not sure. I'm not a financial person. Dale, you know that. Would you and Garrett be willing to come over today and help me go through them? I'd feel better having family with me. Another pause. Longer this time. Of course, Margaret. We'll be there by 10. I hung up and sat with my tea and watched the mountains turn from gray to gold. They thought they were coming to collect evidence. They were coming to watch me hand them something they hadn't expected. Part 3. Everything Garrett and Dale didn't know. Ruth Calloway was 63 years old, 5 feet 2 inches tall, and had the quiet, absolute confidence of a woman who had spent 4 decades being underestimated by men who later regretted it. She wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and spoke in complete sentences that never wandered from their point. When I arrived at her office at 8:15, she had agreed, without hesitation, to meet me before regular hours. She stood to greet me with a handshake that meant business. I've been expecting your call for 3 weeks, she said. I was beginning to wonder. I just found the envelope last night. She nodded. Leonard told me that might happen. He said you were sensible but that you'd need to fall all the way to the bottom before you'd think to look behind the toolbox. She said it without any judgment. He knew you very well. He did, I agreed, and my voice only wavered slightly. She walked me through everything over the next 90 minutes. The real will, the protected accounts, combined with the insurance policies. Leonard had set aside just over $1.1 million in assets that were entirely in my name. Entirely liquid, entirely beyond Garrett and Dale's reach. The audit report was thorough enough that Ruth estimated, conservatively, that a criminal referral for Dale's embezzlement would result in charges. Garrett's involvement in suppressing the legitimate will added obstruction of justice to the mix. What do you want to do? She asked, when we'd been through it all. I thought about Garrett's face across my coffee table. I thought about Dale's warm voice on the phone at 5 in the morning. Recalibrating his approach in real time. Deciding how to manage me. I thought about Forsyth's briefcase on the coffee table with the ring stains Leonard had left. I want them to get exactly what they planned for me to get. I said, nothing useful. Ruth allowed herself a small smile. Then let's talk about the gift deed. The gift deed was Ruth's idea. Technically, but Leonard had anticipated it. In a separate note in the envelope, one I'd almost missed. Folded into the back of the audit report, he'd written a single paragraph. If you want to give them the properties, the mortgages transfer with them. They'll own 400 square feet of equity between them and owe the banks $770,000. No lender will refinance given their existing debt loads. They'll have 45 days before the banks begin foreclosure proceedings. I looked into this carefully. The math works. The math did work. I had checked it 3 times at the kitchen table before dawn. Ruth filed the paperwork that morning. She also placed calls to 2 people. The Buncombe County District Attorney's Office to report Dale's embezzlement, and the North Carolina State Bar to report Forsyth's participation in presenting a superseded will as the operative legal document. Then she called me. "Everything is in motion," she said. "When are you meeting them?" 10 o'clock. "Would you like me there?" I thought about it. Then I thought about Leonard telling me I was smarter than anyone had given me credit for. "No," I said. "I can handle this part myself." Garrett arrived at 9:55. Dale came 3 minutes later in a separate car, which told me they'd spoken between my phone call and now and had decided, for whatever reason, not to arrive together, an attempt at appearing casual, like they'd each just happened to come by. I had coffee ready, I had the kitchen table clear, and I had exactly 2 documents visible on the counter. The gift deed and a folder that appeared from the outside to contain a great deal of paperwork. "Thank you both for coming," I said, and I meant it, just not in the way they assumed. Dale hugged me. Garrett gave me a brief, stiff shoulder pat that I recognized as the full extent of his emotional vocabulary when it came to me. They sat at the kitchen table and accepted coffee and looked around the room with the particular scanning quality of people calculating what belongs to them. "You mentioned documents," Garrett said. "Yes." I sat across from them both. "I've been going through the workshop. And I've been talking to a lawyer." Dale's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. "A lawyer? Margaret, I hope you haven't been talking to people who don't understand the full picture of Dad's estate." "Sometimes. Her name is Ruth Calloway," I said. "She's been holding Leonard's real will for 14 months. The kitchen went very quiet. "What do you mean, real will?" Garrett said. It wasn't a question. It was the voice of a man buying himself 3 seconds to think. "I mean the will Leonard executed after he discovered that Dale had taken $212,000 from the family business," I said. Dale set down his coffee cup. His hand was not entirely steady. "I don't know what documents you think you found," Garrett said, and his voice had shifted, cooler now, back into the lawyer's register he used when he wanted to make you feel like you were misunderstanding something obvious. "But I can assure you, the will Forsyth presented is the operative." "It isn't," I said, and Forsyth knew that when he presented it. "Ruth has already been in touch with the state bar." Garrett went still. I slid the folder across the table. Inside were copies of everything: the audit, the bank statements, the email exchanges, the timeline. I'd organized it myself, chronologically, the way Leonard had always organized his own paperwork. It was, I realized, something I'd learned from watching him. "The original documents are with Ruth," I said. "These are copies, for your reference." Dale opened the folder. He looked at the first page. Then he closed it again. "Garrett," he said quietly. Garrett didn't answer. He was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not anger. I'd braced for anger. Something more complicated than anger. Something that lived in the space between fury and the dawning awareness that he'd badly miscalculated something. "What do you want?" he asked. "I want you to accept your inheritance," I said. "The house and the Brevard property. Exactly as you planned." A pause. "Those properties have mortgages against them," I said. $480,000 on the house. $290,000 on Brevard. You'll receive equity of approximately -$170,000 between you. No bank will refinance given your existing financial situations. You'll have 45 days. Dale made a sound I can only describe as a punctured silence. Like something inside him had deflated. "That's what Leonard left you," I said. "You and your lawyer were so eager to get me to sign papers that you didn't stop to verify what you were actually inheriting." "And if we refuse?" Garrett said. "Then Ruth proceeds with the criminal referral for the embezzlement." and the state bar processes the complaint against Forsyth, which will likely implicate whoever hired him to present a document he knew to be superseded. I met Garrett's eyes. That would be you. The silence stretched long enough that I became aware of the refrigerator humming. And a bird outside at the feeder Leonard had built 12 years ago from cedar scraps. This isn't what Dad would have wanted, Garrett said finally. His voice had lost its professional smoothness. He sounded, for the first time since I'd known him, like a person instead of a performance. You didn't know your father as well as you thought, I said, not unkindly, just the truth. Part 4. The hearing. 3 weeks later, Garrett and Dale signed the gift deed in front of a notary, accepting the 2 properties with their associated mortgages. They had no viable alternative. Forsyth had already surrendered his license pending the bar investigation. The DA's office had opened a preliminary inquiry into Dale's embezzlement, a process that Dale's own attorney had advised him would be significantly worse if he appeared to be obstinate in related civil proceedings. They showed up to the notary's office, a small, fluorescent lit room in a strip mall off Merriman Avenue, without their wives, without Forsyth, without anyone except a chastened-looking young associate attorney who was doing his evident best not to make eye contact with anyone. The notary, a middle-aged woman named Sandra who had clearly seen everything, laid out the documents with unhurried efficiency. Garrett picked up the pen first. He held it over the signature line for a moment and looked at me across the table. I hope you know, he said, that this isn't over. Yes it is, I said. And I meant it in a way he didn't understand yet. Not as a threat, not as defiance. I meant it the way you mean it when you've been carrying something heavy for a very long time and you've just set it down. He signed. Dale signed. The notary stamped the documents with the satisfying thunk of a rubber stamp being applied with intention. It was over in 11 minutes. In the parking lot, Dale stopped beside his car, a leased sedan that would, I later learned, be repossessed 4 months after this, and said to me, without quite looking at me, he really did this. Dad really planned all of this. He did, I said. He must have been so angry at us. I thought about the letter. About don't let them make you small. About 31 years of Sunday mornings and ring stains on a coffee table and a workshop key on my keyring. I think he was heartbroken. I said, there's a difference. Dale nodded once, got in his car, and drove away. Part 5. What came after? The house sold 8 weeks later for $200,000 over asking price. The Asheville market had been moving fast, and Ruth had advised listing immediately. The combined proceeds from the sale, plus the protected accounts Leonard had built and both insurance policies, left me with assets I was still not entirely used to thinking about without feeling slightly unsteady. I bought a small farmhouse outside of Black Mountain, on 11 acres with a creek and a barn that needs more work than I will probably ever finish. The realtor described it as a project property, which I took as a challenge. Leonard would have loved it. There is a workshop space in the barn and I have been slowly, on weekends, trying to teach myself the basics of furniture making from a library of YouTube tutorials and one very patient retired carpenter named Ed who lives down the road and came over one afternoon to see what I was making a mess of. I am making a significant mess of it. I am enjoying every minute. Garrett and Dale lost both properties to foreclosure. The bank moved quickly, as Ruth had predicted, and without the ability to refinance or make the payments. There was nothing to be done. Garrett's law practice, I heard through the kind of quiet small city channels that carry information whether you want them to or not, had been affected by the bar inquiry, not a disbarment, but a formal censure. The kind that follows a lawyer's name into every room they enter afterward. Dale is in some form of debt negotiation. His consulting business closed. I don't think about them much. Not because I'm bitter, but because I'm busy. I joined a pottery class in Swannanoa on Tuesday evenings. I have been attempting to grow heirloom tomatoes with partial success. Ed says my soil needs lime and I believe him. I adopted a dog from the shelter in Asheville. A 3-year-old hound mix named Henry who has opinions about everything and expresses them loudly at 4 in the morning when he hears deer in the field. 2 months ago, I established a small foundation in Leonard's name. The Leonard Aldrich Fund for Small Business Integrity provides legal consultation for small business owners who suspect financial misconduct by partners or family members. The kind of misconduct that is too small to attract a large firm's attention and too devastating to ignore. Ruth sits on the board. Ed has offered to make shares for the office, which I think means he's found a project he likes better than advising me on soil chemistry. The intake process for the foundation's first applicants opened last month. We received 47 inquiries in the first 2 weeks. Leonard would have been proud of that number. I think about the night I found the envelope sometimes. About sitting on that wooden stool in the workshop in the dark, with 11 pages of Leonard's handwriting spread across the workbench. Understanding for the first time how completely he had seen me. Not as the woman who needed to be protected from the truth, but as the woman who could handle it, if someone gave her the chance. He gave me the chance. He gave me the key. Years ago, when the workshop was new, and he said, "Now so do you." And I never once thought to wonder what it was for. It turns out it was for this. For the moment when everything was gone and I needed to find the one place he'd made sure I'd look. If you're listening to this story and something in it sounds familiar, if someone has called you family right before they handed you the bill for it, I want you to know what Leonard knew. And what I finally understand. The people who are certain you won't fight back are always the most surprised when you do. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I want to see how far Leonard's story has traveled.